Hi, I'm Spencer Critchley, sitting in for Jeff Pavir. I'll trade you a Charles Manson for a Hillside Strangler. Some people say true crime trading cards are an exploitive, quick buck scheme. The card's publisher calls them journalism. Is there a difference? Decide for yourself tonight on Primetime. You've probably heard about true crime trading cards. They feature serial killers and mass murderers. They caused a storm of controversy as well as a lawsuit for their publisher, Eclipse Enterprises. That's because Kenneth Bianchi, known as the Hillside Strangler, claimed that Eclipse was using his likeness on a trading card for commercial profit. Catherine Ironwood, editor-in-chief at Eclipse, feels that the true crime series is a legitimate form of journalism. Catherine Ironwood joins me tonight from Forestville in Northern California. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, nice to be here.
Well, thank you. It's nice to have you. Besides the true crime trading cards, what else has Eclipse published?
Oh, well, we've been doing journalistic trading cards for many years now. Our first set was the Iran-Contra scandal, so you know how long ago that was, about 1988. We've done the savings and loan scandal. We did a set on the rise and fall and disintegration of the Soviet Union, a set on early jazz musicians, just so many different kinds of cards that, you know, they range all the way from current events to history.
I heard you did one on friendly dictators.
That's right. Those are dictators that the U.S. government sends tax dollars to.
Oh, I see. That's what you mean by friendly. I was trying to picture what, Casper the Friendly Dictator looks like.
Well, see, originally there were going to be two sets, friendly dictators and enemy dictators. But while we were working on enemy dictators, the Soviet Union collapsed. And so that set became the rise and fall of the Soviet Union.
Oh, I see. What does one of these trading cards look like?
Well, it looks just like a regular trading card, about 2.5 by 3.5 inches. It's got a full-color painting on one side, usually of a person, sometimes an event, such as the Battle of Stalingrad, or whatever it might be. On the other side, there's about 250 words of text, and a total set of cards could maybe have 110 cards in the set, which would equal 30,000 words of journalism on the subject.
You say a painting. Why a painting?
Well, we sell cards to collectors, and there are certain collectors who prefer art over photos. If no good photo can be found, they'd rather have a beautiful painting than a muddy photo.
Oh, I see. What type of information is on the card?
Well, most of the cards are biographies, quick biographies. You know, who's Michael Milken and what did he have to do with the savings and loan scandal, or what was the Anglo-Chinese opium war of the 1830s, and how did it affect drug policy in Britain? There's a little bit of text. If it's a biography, you'll get the person's birth date and what they did that was important to the journalistic subject, and then if they died, you know, how they died or whatever.
Now, how are these journalistic cards distinct from sports cards?
Well, they're more distinct in the mind of non-collectors than in the mind of collectors. After all, sports cards are sports journalism, if you think about it for a moment. They're the statistics box that would appear in the sports section of your paper. Some of them have anecdotes about the sports figures, too. I wouldn't say they're the highest level of journalism, but they are sports journalism.
Why do you believe that these cards are a legitimate form of journalism?
Well, I didn't invent them. They go back to about 1888, when the very first trading cards appeared in America and Britain and Germany. They've always been around, and they've always been considered a legitimate form of journalism. Some of the earliest cards would have, for instance, a history of the American Civil War or World War I battles with the generals on the side of the Allies. They've been around for a long time. Sports cards became more popular in the 70s and kind of took over the market. But now they're on the wane again, and current events and history cards are coming back. They're making a huge comeback.
I want to get back to those early ones. I've never heard of that before. Who was publishing those and why?
Tobacco cards were the original cards, and chocolate cards, and coffee cards.
Oh.
The companies that manufacture the products would put a card in. Originally, the card had a beautiful chromolitho print suitable for framing, say in a large package of coffee, but they began making the print smaller and smaller to go on a small package of tobacco. And originally, back in the 1870s, the back would be an ad for the product, but later it became a text about the subject matter. And some of the most famous ones, oh my gosh, the first criminal cards came out in 1888, and they are Pirates of the Spanish Main. And there were natural history cards, useful songbirds of America, cards on farming and gardening, how to plant melons and stuff like that on cards. In the 1930s, there were cards on crime and criminals, and also some wonderful sets on the growing conflict in Europe that became World War II. Cards on the Spanish Civil War, on the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, on the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, and then eventually on the declaration of war.
Well, I never would have known.
Oh, yeah. These are very collectible, and there are literally thousands of these things have been issued over the last 100 and some years, and we're proudly a part of that.
I think most of us are more familiar with sports cards. Was there a point at which these journalistic type of cards changed over or gave way to the sports cards?
Around the time when photo cards were introduced, starting in the late 1950s, sports cards became more popular. And some of the last history and journalism cards came out in the 60s, a commemorative set on 100 years of the American Civil War. And then they kind of went into decline. And we were not the first people to revive them in 1988 when we brought out the Iran-Contra set. But it was there were a couple of other sets right before ours. It was a very nostalgic effort on our part to attract the baby boom generation who were familiar with those journalism cards from their youth. And I have to say I'm one of those baby boomers.
Is that right? Is that what made you think of it to bring these back?
Yes, very much so. And that's why we did them with paintings. Because that's how those cards had always been done, with paintings, not photos. How
do you decide what issues your trading cards are going to explore?
Well, we go through the newspaper, and we break it down into the city desk, which we ignore because we can't do local stuff.
Bit of a limited market
world
there.
News, financial pages, medical news, science news, and we do sets about all these different things. The crime beat. Just every different sector of a newspaper is amenable to putting into a trading card.
What led you to decide to publish the true crime series with all the gangsters and serial killers and mass murderers?
Well, that came about as a result of two things. We have editorial meetings every week, and we were working on the Soviet Union cards, which had already been changed once. Remember, they were the enemy dictators.
Yes.
Then they became the Soviet Union cards. And all of a sudden, there's this coup in the Soviet Union. And I was in a panic. What am I going to do? I can't put the cards out and get the story wrong. We've got to stop work on the cards until things settle down. So I told this to the other editors in a meeting, and one of the editors said she had just been to the local mall bookstore, big chain bookstore, and they had just put out a new section of books called True Crime Books, which had not existed before. She said, maybe we should do true crime cards. Seems like there's popularity. And my publisher said, oh, you mean mafia cards? And she said, no, serial killers. And I said, like the old Brethman ads, no, stop, you're both right. Let's do them both in one set. And also let's add detectives, district attorneys, and FBI agents. And that's what we did.
Now, did you have to think hard before you did this? I mean, I know that you're familiar that this is not a comfortable idea for many people. A lot of people think this is really creepy.
I guess I've been a reporter long enough that it didn't occur to me that people would think this was any different than what they buy a newspaper for, what they turn the TV on for. It really did not occur to me. I thought it would be popular because, hey, Walden Books has a true crime section, therefore it's a coming thing. There's these fads in popularity. But I did not think it would be controversial. That was a real surprise to me.
Now, your company is being sued by Kenneth Bianchi, one of the two men convicted for the Hillside Strangler murders. And he says you're using his likeness for commercial purposes. How do you feel about that?
Well, I have found out a lot about Mr. Bianchi since he sued us. Mr. Bianchi, who is in jail in the state of Washington until the year 2059, at which point he will be extradited, if still alive, to California and face 10 more trials for murder. His hobby nowadays is suing people. And he has sued Good Housekeeping Magazine, New American Library, an author named Darcy O'Brien, the Hearst Publishing Empire. He'll sue anybody who mentions his name in print.
Is that right?
And we are one in a long list of people he has sued. However, it will cost us money. It's going to cost us thousands and thousands of dollars to fight this suit. He represents himself because he studied law while he's in jail, and it's his hobby.
Well, I guess he's got time, doesn't he?
He has nothing but time at this point.
What has the response been like from the public and collectors to the True Crime series?
They're the best-selling product of any kind we've put out in the entire history of our company since 1977. We publish books, comic books, posters, and trading cards. True crime trading cards have sold more than anything else we've ever done. But I'll say, for the benefit of public opinion about the public, the second best-selling thing we've ever done was a graphic adaptation of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, a children's fantasy novel. So the public likes all types of things.
Well, there is a strange juxtaposition.
Yeah, it is.
You say that you consider this to be legitimate journalism, and I believe you're sincere about that, but I guess I'm still stuck on the idea that people are collecting and trading these things. And, if I think about, say, a normal newspaper with the stories about grisly mass murders and that sort of stuff, I think that's fine, but anybody who clipped those things out and started saving them and trading them, I would think was pretty strange.
Yeah, it has to do with the way the product is sold. Think about it as a book for a moment. Say I did a book on criminals, and there have been lots of those books, and they're available right now at your local bookstore. Encyclopedias of crime, listing criminals alphabetically. And say I took a paper cutter, and I whacked the binding off that book, and then I took the pages and I shuffled them in random order, and then I told you, you can buy a few pages of this book for a very cheap price, and then you can trade them with other people. That's kind of what a trading card is. It adds to publishing, it adds this strange, elusive interest in lotteries. Will I get the full set with very few packs? I can't explain it. The collector impulse is there. People don't usually actually trade the cards. They may buy until they have a full set and give away the rest, or they may trade them with some other people. But it's something. A lot of people like them in that foil pack where you can't see what you're getting. Now, many of our sets are also done in box sets where all the cards are put together, assembled, and you sell the whole thing as one. Collectors don't like that as much.
Is that right?
They don't, because there's no challenge. In other words, it's a kind of a readership that just wants that little extra challenge. I can't explain it, but there it is.
Yeah, well, I'll be. Now, I've heard that you may be having a little bit of trouble getting these into Canada. Is that right?
Yeah, this just happened. Well, the story goes back to June of last year. We put out the first true crime set, and the Revenue Minister of Canada, whose name is Otto Jelinek, ordered Canadian Customs to detain our true crime cards at the border because he said they were more harmful than drugs for children, and that they were illegal. And then by July 8th of 1992, a panel at Revenue Canada reviewed the cards and determined they were not obscene, not sexually exploitative, and not hate literature, so they were released and they were free to enter Canada. Now, mid-March 1993, I've just been told that Otto Jelinek is now taking our crime and punishment cards. These are cards that are documentaries of famous trials, and the art is by a courtroom artist who witnessed the trials for ABC television, and the text is written by an ABC television news producer. And it's trials like the trial of the man who shot Robert Kennedy, or the trial of Patty Hearst, the heiress who turned to terrorist. They're reviewing these cards at the border, and they're also taking our true crime comic book, which is a comic book that's got a story about the mafia and a story about a serial killer, and they're holding them. And Jelinek said he intends to, quote, move unilaterally to ban the cards by right? Easter, unquote. He doesn't care whether there's a law in Canada that allows him to ban the cards. He's going to make a law. And we don't know anything more about it than that. I hope that Canadians who want to preserve whatever freedom of expression is available there look seriously at this Otto Jelinek, this revenue minister, because it's a very odd thing for him to do. He himself is going to make this law.
You're facing this lawsuit from the Hillside Strangler and some hostility from our Minister of Revenue. What do you figure the future looks like for journalistic trading cards?
Well, the sales go up with every new issue we release. I mean, they really are catching on. But it's not just us. I mean, and it's not just crime. It's not just sensationalistic things. We're doing a set of rhythm and blues musicians of the 1940s, and we expect spectacular sales on those too. It's just it's a thing. People like the format. We're doing a set on UFOs, sightings. We're not pro, we're not con. We're just reporting them. We're doing a set on Hollywood scandals. We're doing a set on the environment, heroes and villains of the environment, and all of these things are having very good sales.
Catherine Ironwood is editor-in-chief at Eclipse Enterprises in Forestville, California. Thanks, Catherine.
Oh, thanks for having me.
That's Carrie Anderson from her debut album Labyrinth, and that was Angel Says. Well, he's got big muscles, a big image, and big clout in Hollywood. And to top it all off, Arnold Schwarzenegger now has a big rocket to advertise his new movie. The rocket and the ad are set to blast off in May. I'll speak to the man who came up with the idea a little later in the show. I'm Spencer Critchley, and you're listening to Prime Time on CBC Radio. Up next, music from two former members of the Pursuit of Happiness, Leslie Stanwyck and Johnny Sinclair. They now call themselves Universal Honey, and this is Just Before Mary Goes. Universal Honey, and Just Before Mary Goes from their debut independent CD release. The ethnic look is back with a vengeance. Once again, haute couture designers are taking inspiration from African tribes and from the cultures of the Middle and Far East, and now they've expanded their repertoires to include Aboriginal Australian and Native North American looks. It's to the point where East Indian caste symbols are considered playful decorations for runway models, and fashion magazines are full of embroidery and fringes and gold brocade. Lena Lenchek looks at fashion for prime time, and she's been thinking about this resurgence of interest in multicultural looks. She joins me tonight from Portland, Oregon to talk about it. Hi, Lena.
Hi, Spencer.
Lena, tell me a little bit more about this nouveau ethnic look. What's the look today?
Well, Spencer, it's exactly what you just described. It's very rich, very elaborate. The kinds of things that are showing up on runways are clothes that are considered ceremonial in the cultures that they come from. I'm talking about Iranian wool coats with 24-karat gold thread embroidery, or wedding dresses from Mexico with elaborate pleats and lace, saris that are brocaded, shawls richly embroidered. These are very expensive, very elaborate looks that are being presented by the top designers.
Lena, I guess we all know that fashion is a cyclical thing, and this isn't the first time we've seen an interest in borrowing looks from other cultures. But I wonder when this interest in this kind of borrowing first showed up.
Spencer, I think we first saw it in the late 18th century in the court of Louis XIV and especially of Marie Antoinette. It's very interesting because at that time, like today, it was a very self-conscious adaptation of another culture, or in this instance of a subculture. Marie Antoinette and her retinue used to play at dressing up as milkmaids in their court at Petit Trianon. And really what this was meant to do was to signify how far they really were from being milkmaids themselves. These courtiers had the luxury of playing at working, and for them it was a game or a joke because they were so confident of their position in the social hierarchy. But of course, ironically, we all know what happened to Marie Antoinette during the French Revolution.
I guess you could look at that as a fashion crime with
Yes.
with an extreme form of punishment. Lena, tell me what the 60s were all about, to jump ahead of a fair haul there. Obviously, ethnic clothes were everywhere in the 60s. Women were wearing those big Indian cotton skirts, and guys were wearing Mexican shirts and that kind of stuff. But I'm pretty sure those people didn't feel like they were condescending to the culture they were borrowing from, like Marie Antoinette was. And so what were they doing?
You're quite right, Spencer. The 60s were a time when ethnic fashion absolutely exploded. It was mainly clothing borrowed from third world cultures. At that time, people were wearing Moroccan kaftans, Indonesian batiks, serapis from Mexico, beautiful, brightly colored embroidered shirts from Guatemala, drawstring trousers from East India, and so on and so on. Everything was made in natural fabrics that were indigenous to whatever area of the world the clothes were taken from. This clothing, very importantly, was clothing that in the original culture was used for work. So these were clothes meant to be worn to the market or to the fields or whatever. In the 60s, then, you were wearing a sort of Tower of Babel of peasant looks, something borrowed from every culture on earth. By wearing this kind of clothing, you were basically endorsing an entire belief system that included things like acupuncture, yoga, a macrobiotic diet, breastfeeding, natural childbirth, Eastern religions, drugs, and so on and so forth. So you knew if you met someone who was dressed head to toe, let's say in Mexican or Indonesian or African clothing, that person was professionally into one of these belief systems, either a midwife or a storyteller or something else.
Or a drug dealer.
Or a drug dealer, exactly, that they were totally immersed in the hippie lifestyle. And in the 1960s, wearing this sort of ethnic costume really wasn't at all about condescension to the third world. It wasn't about laughing at the peasants as it had been in Marie Antoinette's time. It was about communing with them. But later on, it did change, Spencer, because at the beginning of the 70s, several high fashion designers picked up on this ethnic rage and brought it much closer into the mainstream. So by the 70s, it had become just fashion. It lost that counter-cultural cachet that it had had in the late 60s.
So the fashion designers got hold of the trend, but how did that change the values attached to these clothes as we moved into the 80s?
Well, in the 80s, it really came to mean much more the same thing that it had meant when Marie Antoinette was dressing up her court in milkmaid costumes. All of a sudden, the Reagan years were upon us. The clothing that was influenced by other cultures, while it was still around, was really shunted off into ceremonial or evening use. Instead of borrowing from peasants or from agricultural societies altogether, fashion designers now were borrowing from the social elites of other cultures. So what we began to see on the society ladies and the pages of Vogue was hugely expensive Mexican wedding dresses or museum quality Yves Saint Laurent reconstructions of 18th century Russian court dresses with elegant brocading, or to make it even more ludicrous and complicated, 18th century reproductions of 18th century Russian court reproductions or reinterpretations of peasant costumes. So
Holy smokes,
yes,
is that
it was
right?
quite
I guess I missed
complicated.
that one.
Yeah, it was a form of conspicuous consumption writ large, I think, and it meant something very different from what it had meant in the 60s, obviously. All of a sudden, wearing this stuff implied that you were rich, that you had money, that you had leisure time to travel extensively, and that you were an all-round educated, sophisticated person. It was very giddy with self-importance, just as it had been in Marie Antoinette's time. It became a kind of, I wear myself as a museum sort of thing.
Well, so now here we are in the 90s, and this is supposedly a kinder and gentler world in which we're supposed to at least consume more discreetly, and we see a resurgence of ethnic clothing. What's it all about this time?
Well, now I think it means guilt. Now it's all tied in with New Age mysticism, that kind of fin de siècle, apocalyptical expectations, yuppie self-loathing for sure. As you said, we're allowed to consume. We just have to be more discreet about it. And so fashionable people are still wearing extremely expensive floral gypsy fabrics, harem pants, beaded, brocaded vests, and so on. But it's come to represent a kind of renunciation of WASP culture. I think it's a little bit like what we saw in the 19th century and then again in the 60s. It's very similar to the kind of adapting that we're seeing going on in religion. For example, I read an article in Cosmo the other month about women coming to terms with the Native American experience by co-opting some of the Native American rituals. It's really quite ludicrous and ridiculous. You go to a sweet grass ceremony and suddenly you're not responsible for the past anymore. A lot of white people who are into New Age are managing to convince themselves that they were reincarnated as natives in an earlier life cycle as well, so that, all that this does is it trivializes the issues, obviously, but it also allows these people to sublimate or to escape the guilt that they feel as privileged white folks. They're creating some kind of pseudo-ethnic identity for themselves to escape their real heritage, which is not all that pretty, which makes them feel ashamed.
Lena, sometime it occurs to me we should talk about fashions in reincarnation, because it seems to me a few years ago you couldn't find anybody who hadn't been reincarnated as a king or a queen or the Pope or something, and now you're telling me their past lives are Native Americans and that kind of stuff. A trend in itself. So I get the impression that you think that this whole thing is totally illegitimate.
Oh, I think, yes, on the whole it is. What these designers are doing is completely divorcing the ethnic culture from its roots, transforming it into just a kind of commodity. And the people who are wearing it are showing no real interest in the culture itself, with the exception, a very occasional exception of a really superficial interest in the religions of other cultures. I think you really are stuck here with role playing, with a kind of theater, empty theater at that. I mean, I have, for example, two lovely friends who exemplify this very well. One is a psychoanalyst who has decided that his true religion is Native American North Dakota tribal worship. And his wife, who's a writer, has decided that she's going to become Taoist. And I don't know how the two of them are going to coordinate these things, but it's that kind of shopping around. You know, I'll take this part of this culture and that part of that culture, and then I'll create some kind of harmonious chimera. That's the impulse, I think, that underwrites the current resurgence of ethnic fashion. Now, the other thing about it is that it's happening on a street level, too. You see a lot of middle-class white kids and college kids these days wearing the emblems of other cultures. You see a medallion, for example, in the colors of Africa, or a Mexican and Guatemalan jacket, or all those nose rings that are appearing on adolescents now from India. And the vast majority of these kids really don't know anything about Africa or India or Latin America. They're just appropriating the symbols because it gives them a veneer of counterculture cachet.
Of course, Lena, I guess what a lot of people who are doing this would say is that they're trying to reach out to the rest of the world and I guess bring cultures together. But do you think that the people who are out wearing these ethnic accoutrements have any real interest in the symbolic or religious significance of what they're wearing or what they're adopting?
Spencer, I'm skeptical. I think for the most part the answer is no. If you look at other fashion indicators, you realize that this ethnic stuff is an anomaly. It's not genuine. The trend in haute cuisine, for example, is toward eating the things that occur naturally in your region, be they fiddleheads or salmon or corn or whatever. So we're moving away from Mexican, Thai, or Caribbean food. If you look at supermodels, what's happening there is, again, all American. Claudia Schiffer and Cindy Crawford and a number of the top models today tend to be very blonde, very corn-fed looking, firm and buxom, the Marilyn Monroe type. And these women seem to have replaced faces like those of Iman and Naomi Campbell, women from other cultures. And in fact, these in turn seem to be replaced, even as we speak, by much younger 14-year-old Twiggy clones, very waspy, thin, adolescent young girls. So this revival of pseudo-ethnic clothing seems to be the only sphere in which Americans are interested in exploring other cultures on any level. And it's extremely shallow and self-serving.
Lena Lenchek looks at fashion for prime time. She joined me this evening from Portland, Oregon. Thanks, Lena.
Thank you, Spencer.
Asana wadidi anase ubedidi asana wabidi Osibwa mundanta Obrenya tiate to beni betiate O chance be ye gene Obi it me obi mpna si obi kuno Obi ri me be a dan for pa baby What dey you down social Down social What dey you 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 down social, where dare you down social? side. I found the idea and I saw when you go here. I don't say more, you know. It's a true super quapping. I put your second country garada. I just sent social. Brandy bit to attend. A brandy bit to a coyer social. What dare you down social? I down social. What dare you down social? Where 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 dare you down social? Osibamu danta, obrenya pieta jo obreni bepiata, o chance be ye jina. Ubi jimi obimpina, obimpransu obikuno, ubi ribe me be dan fu papa bi. Uti hu krani eje, uti hu krani eje, no ape onwa se matukwanja ho. Hey, chale, we are see. Enough from cry. Where dare you? I can't social. 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 See where dare you? I can't social. Where dare you? I can't social. I can't social. Where dare you? I can't social. At the mood I know I need to move. I can't social. Can't go for I would you want more chair. I can't social. Can't go for you.
The High Life Stars, a group of musicians from Ghana playing the West African style of music known as High Life. The song we heard was Akawon Sosha. Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to space. Schwarzenegger's soon-to-be-released movie called The Last Action Hero is set right here on Earth, but an advertisement for the movie will appear on a NASA rocket to be launched this May. Not content with mere global campaigns, marketers are looking to outer space as the final advertising frontier. Mike Lawson is president of Space Marketing, the firm responsible for the Schwarzenegger in Space ad campaign. Mike joins me by phone from Atlanta. Hi, Mike.
Hello there. How you doing?
I'm just fine, thanks. Mike, tell me about this ad. Where will it appear on the rocket, and what will it say?
Well, it will appear on the 6 boosters, which are the 6 rocket engines. It will have Schwarzenegger spelled out, and then we'll have Last Action Hero on 2 sides of the launch vehicle above the boosters. These are 6 separate rocket engines that, if you were to to look at it, it would be like you have your launch vehicle, and then you have 6 small pencils surrounding it. And these are your rocket engines, and I guess right on the outer casing will be the Schwarzenegger name on all 6 boosters.
Will there be an actual picture of Arnold on the rockets as well?
No, there will not be.
Who's putting the rocket up, and what's the mission?
It's part of a joint venture between government and the private sector, and there was a great need by government to create a new program to get serious microgravity research to space on a timely fashion, as well as a little bit more inexpensively. And so they created a program, granted $85 million to several what they call CCDSs here in the United States.
What's a CCDS?
CCDS stands for Centers for the Commercial Development of Space.
Mm-hmm.
And with the shuttle program on backlog, and many, many experiments are turned down because they have to be man-rated, they felt there was a real need. But part of the package, there's one thing for government to put in the initial $85 million seed money. Well, for the participants to be involved, they had to put up their millions of dollars too to make it work. And so it's sort of a joint venture between the government and the private sector.
Now, you say that this is a government-private partnership.
That is correct.
Whose idea was the movie ad, and why is that being done?
Okay. We have seen what the Soviets have done. Coca-Cola went up to the Soviet Mir in August of '91, and they paid handsomely for it. And there have been other activity as far as promotions or advertisements on the side of rockets with the Russian program. And so they thought, well, why not? You know, we need to get the public sector more involved in the space program. So they hired our firm. We came on with a very, very strong PR blitz and basically put it out there in the marketplace. Whoever's interested in putting a logo on the side of a rocket for a first-time opportunity, give us a call. And so we had basically about 24 major corporations that wanted to purchase the space.
Any particular reason why you chose Columbia Pictures?
Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger is quite an individual, and our young people out there have a sort of a relationship and an identity with Arnold, and that he is well thought of, he is very well respected, and he's a terrific spokesman for the project. And so we felt that this was the right pick. I mean, if it was a Doritos and you had some sort of an individual who's using the chips, it's not the same sort of thing, or the Easter Bunny or something. We need something that was very pertinent and very strong.
How much is this spot costing Columbia Pictures?
About $500,000.
Really?
And one of the things, though, that's very important is that there is a massive promotion which is starting this weekend, where we're unloading or launching off the 900 number, where you can call in on 1-900-9-ROCKET, and these messages, these commercial messages, will be put on CD-ROM, and we'll actually take these messages to space, send them up in space, and we're also going to be transmitting.
Is that right? So you mean ordinary people can call this 900 number, presumably for a fee, and
Correct.
say whatever they like, and you'll record that and launch it up into orbit?
Correct. And some of these messages, randomly, an operator will come on the line, and we will take 20 callers a day, in which they'll go into a pool, in which two winners at the end of the promotion will have the opportunity to launch the rocket with Arnold Schwarzenegger in late May, early June.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
What happens to those messages? I mean, do they get played back up there, or do they just go for...
That is one of the things we're going to release in the next couple of weeks on what we're going to do with them. But we basically will be transmitting. We will also, it's kind of like a time capsule that these commercial messages will go to space. Hopefully, whoever's out there will pick them up some year or years away. Also, some of those messages will be played back and for the media to pick up to see what kids around the world are calling in and what they want to say to the future of mankind and or whoever's listening. And then we have some other promotional activity which will be announced as the promotion continues.
Now, you say Columbia is paying $500,000 to get the Last Action Hero lettering on the side of these launch vehicles here. That sounds like a lot of money, but how does that relate, say, to the cost of a TV ad?
Well, if you take Super Bowl, you're looking at a 30-second commercial running about $850,000, and the activity prior to the Super Bowl, and all the progression is right there on that day, or a day before, or 2 days before, or whatever. In our particular situation, Columbia, for that $500,000, has already got it 10 times and 100 times more. They've been in every major publication worldwide. They've been in television spots, Tonight Show. They're everywhere with it. So it has already paid for itself, because what they wanted to do is have an announcement that there is a movie and Arnold Schwarzenegger is the star of the movie. So they have reached their goals and objectives.
Yeah, I was going to say, this ad, I assume, is just going to burn up in the atmosphere as these motors fall back to Earth.
That is correct.
But I guess Columbia doesn't feel that $500,000 is a waste of money under the circumstances.
No, not when it would have, the publicity that they've already received would have cost them many, many millions. So the PR value alone it's in the millions.
Mm-hmm. And what about the day of the launch? We're used to the shuttle launches becoming somewhat run-of-the-mill. Is there going to be something special on the day of this launch?
Well, I think because it is making history. This is whoever's there at the launch pad with Arnold. They are making history. They're launching the rocket, and that's the first worldwide that has ever happened. Where the public has been able to get involved with it, with the space program. We do have commitments from all the major networks, which will be there.
Do you think this is the path of the future for space exploration? Are we going to see ads on the moon, for example?
I don't think you'll see ads on the moon, but if you will see product endorsement, for instance, will you see the arches, golden arches on the moon? No, but you'll probably see a astronaut, cosmonaut consuming a McDonald's hamburger.
Really? So I guess it'd be like watching skiers, I guess, at the Olympics. Where
yeah, I think very, very much so. But I think it's
spacesuits with Nike splashed all over them.
Right. But I think it's as long as it's helped to underwrite the cost of serious research, as well as getting us to go forward, that nobody will take this in bad taste. And I think that's one of the reasons why Columbia has won out on this, is because they are helping underwrite serious research in space. And that's quite a PR release within itself.
Mike Lawson is the president of a firm called Space Marketing. He joined me by phone from Atlanta. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you so much.
Car advertising used to be so easy. All you needed to attract all those young males with speed and babes on their minds was a flashy red sports car and a cute blonde. But with almost half the cars sold today being bought by women, the car business is beginning to change. Tomorrow night on Prime Time, we'll look at how car manufacturers and marketers are trying to appeal to women. My guest will be car reviewer and road tester Leslie Hazelton, author of a book called Confessions of a Fast Woman. I'm Spencer Critchley. Thanks for listening tonight. See you tomorrow.